Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This guy over here is Tim, and this is Second Legacy. And thank you so much for stopping by. Now, if you're new to Second Legacy, Tim and I are doing a collaborative channel, and this channel is focused solely on passing the blessing of the Second Amendment along to the next generation. Now, how we do that? We dive deep into issues, and we give you the ammunition, so to speak, to have the conversations with that local anti-gunner that you know, and the people in the room, more importantly, to bring more people to our side, to get them in the trenches with us. So again, pass that blessing on to not only ourselves, but that next generation. So if you like the content, please hit a subscribe button, like the video, share the video, turn that notification bell on so YouTube makes sure, at least we think, they'll let you know. And we would love to grow this channel with you and welcome you into the fold. But what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to set this bad boy up because there was a whole hullabaloo coming out of the left around domestic violence abusers now getting their gun rights back. And that was the way they framed it. However, as usual with gun controllers, there's a lot more to dive into here. So, Tim, with your permission, I hope you're having a great day. Do you mind if I read this real quick, then we'll hit it?
Please do.
All right, let's get it. All right, Mr. Producer, if you could hit number 1, that would be amazing. People under domestic violence orders can own guns. U.S. Appeals Court rules. So right out the gate, scary. Okay, but let me show you what actually is going on. And everything is always linked in the description box for your review. If we go to number 2, Mr. Producer, February 2nd from Reuters. A U.S. appeals court on Thursday declared unconstitutional a federal law making it a crime for people under domestic violence restraining orders to own firearms. The decision by a 3-judge panel of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals is the latest victory for gun rights advocates since a Supreme Court ruling last June granting a broad right for people to carry firearms outside the home. So they're talking about the Bruin decision. And the last piece I'm going to show you, Mr. Producer, number 3, and then me and Tim are going to break this down. In Thursday's decision, Circuit Judge Corey Wilson said banning people under domestic violence restraining orders from owning firearms, quote, embodies salutary policy goals meant to protect vulnerable people in our society. But the judge, appointed by Donald Trump, boogeyman, said the Bruin ruling made such a consideration irrelevant and that from a historical perspective, the ban was an outlier that our ancestors would never have accepted. Now, we're about to break this down because they are going full-on marketing push on the left. First off, Tim, what do you think about this just on the surface, and then we'll break it down deeper?
Absolutely. So let's make it clear what a domestic violence order is. It's commonly known in history as a restraining order, but they've rebranded it to include the phrase domestic violence because, again, this is all coming out of a think tank and focus groups. How can we scare the voter into, believing a false narrative? So the DVO is just a fancy name, a rephrased name for a restraining order. And this is no different than, let's say, something like a red flag law. So what is required to get a restraining order? Now, it varies from state to state. I can only speak to my own state, and there's a couple of different things that I may touch upon in today's video with regards to my state of Indiana. But all that's typically required is that somebody goes to a judge and says, I'm scared of that person, and I want a restraining order. And sometimes they have to present some evidence. Other times they take them at face value. If it's a female claiming it against a male, that might get more, leverage than, say, a male trying to claim it against a female, something like that. And so then the order is given, and then this person is, historically speaking, prior to this decision, they lose their rights. And in this case, we're talking about their Second Amendment rights. And so basically you have an accuser that goes to a judge in secrecy and gets a restraining order, or a DVO, as they're calling them now, and then you lose your rights. You never got to face your accuser. You didn't get your day in court. You just lost your rights. So now you're guilty until proven innocent, which is the exact opposite of how things are supposed to work in our constitutional republic. We're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And this is what the court has upheld.
Oh, absolutely. And, we're just going to insert the disclaimer here. We are not advocating for any bad outcome for anyone. What we're talking about is the marketing approach that the left is taking in this court ruling. We're going to break this down to what it truly means, what they're actually talking about, and it might shed a little bit different light on the situation. Now, of course, again, just to reiterate, any type of violence, domestic violence, anything like that is unacceptable. But that's not truly what is in question here. Because as Tim alluded to, this is very much aligned to red flag laws, because what the court said was not that domestic violence abusers can now have firearms. What they said was You can't take someone's Second Amendment rights based on an accusation. That's the important piece. But the left can't have that because that makes sense. If you look at First Amendment rights, you can't take someone's First Amendment rights with just based on an accusation. I mean, like, if you look at it through a different lens, that's what we're talking about here. But it makes you really beg the question, why would they try to frame it so hard? Because if you look this up, you will see this in Politico, the AP, CBS, ABC, any news source you're going to find, it's going to be the headline, domestic violence abusers can now have guns because of Bruin. It's all a marketing narrative. But Tim, why would they make that narrative so important when that's clearly not what the ruling says?
I think I kind of touched upon it a little bit at the beginning of the video. This will probably dovetail into discussion around red flag laws, because what is a red flag law? It's in essence allowing the courts to go around your constitutional rights, assume that you're guilty, and then you must go prove your innocence to regain your rights. And that's what a red flag law is. Now, you'll have some politicians like Dan Crenshaw saying, we want to pass red flag laws, but we want to do that in such a way that we respect due process and your rights. That's an oxymoron, because the whole purpose of a red flag law is to circumvent due process, to circumvent your rights. And as President Trump famously said, take the guns now, due process later. And that is highly unconstitutional. That would be like me taking your First, Fourth, or Fifth Amendment rights because some accuser goes to a Star Chamber court. You have no idea this meeting's even taking place. And out of that Star Chamber court comes an order for you to lose your constitutional rights. Now you must go to court and defend yourself. Now the presumption is that you're guilty, and now you must prove that you're worthy of having your rights. And that is completely contrary to our freedom, our liberty, and the document that we cherish, our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And so if you take a look at the argument being made and how they're painting it, it's dishonest on its face. The whole DVO discussion is dishonest on its face. They're presenting it in such a way to scare the general public. Oh my gosh, people accused of domestic violence can now have their guns. But if you take a look at it, as Braden said, if you take a look at it in the proper context, all this is the court saying, you can't deny somebody their rights based on an accusation. And anybody that believes in freedom would have to agree with us. But sadly, the gun grabbers don't believe in freedom, and they only want freedom for those that agree with their particular perspective. And when it comes to the Second Amendment, they want that abolished anyway. So this is nothing more than smoke and mirrors. This is something that they're doing to scare people, but at its very core, this is a constitutional discussion, a constitutional argument, and the courts decided correctly. Now, as Braden said, we're not saying that violent people shouldn't be punished, or that we're making light of the fact that people can be scared of an ex or, a neighbor that's stalking them or whatever. There needs to be other mechanisms in place to deal with criminal activity, and there generally are, that doesn't require us giving up our rights to protect ourselves. Because without a conviction. Right. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And that's the key. It's conviction. Now there are so many different processes in place. You're not going to go to jail for felony murder if you have not been convicted. And that's an extreme case. But again, it's based on conviction. It's not based off of an accusation, because accusations fly all the time. Look at our political discourse right now. So if you're talking about the actual circumstance of, you've been accused, we'll have more discussion around this. We'll look deeper into it. That doesn't mean that you need to lose all of your rights prior to any type of further investigation, discussion, or what have you. Now, something else really piques my interest. And if you guys have seen my channel, I notice when patterns happen. I just like noticing patterns. The left is always going to tell you what they're afraid of. Every single time. When it comes to gun control advocates, they will always attack what they're afraid of the most. First and foremost, that's what they do. Isolate the target, or identify the target, isolate the target, destroy the target. That's what they do. Now, why would they hit this so incredibly hard when in the Fifth Circuit, this actually doesn't have an effect? I've done multiple videos on my channel where the state laws actually represent that ruling. So there's not really even an outcome change. So why would they be so upset? The reason why If this goes to a national level, it brings into a much larger conversation something that they hold much more dear than the restraining order fight. It's around red flag laws. You've got 19 states and the District of Columbia in the United States that employ some type of red flag law. In short, that's 19 different states that allow a process of which your rights are taken without due process whatsoever. You can't face your accuser. You can't face the evidence against you. You don't have any recourse. And the first thing you hear about it is when the cops or sheriff or law enforcement sees your Second Amendment rights. And as Tim mentioned, you have to go back to the court and prove that that wasn't true. You're coming from a position of guilty, feeling the penalties, and then having to get them back. Now, Tim, what do you think about that? Do you think there's a tie-in to the red flag law take? Like, do you think there's a little bit of fear there, or am I just making that up out of left field?
Oh, no. As I said earlier, it's absolutely one's tied to the other. And this is them trying to push the entire narrative forward of, guns are bad, people aren't to be trusted, and we need to take them away any way we possibly can, even if that means stomping all over your constitutional rights, rights other than just the Second Amendment, stomping all over the other constitutional rights to get to the Second Amendment rights. And so absolutely, I think you're 100% spot on. Now, I want to say that I do live in a state with a red flag law. It was in the state when I got here. They've had it forever. And I also had a good friend of mine who was engaged to be married. He called off the wedding. And in response to having the wedding called off, his then fiance called the police, made a false accusation against him, claimed domestic violence, which was a complete fabrication. He lost his gun rights for years and had to go to court to prove his innocence based upon the word of this single would-be witness, right? But it was a false witness.
Right.
And so ultimately, she admitted in writing that she made the whole thing up. And that is what ultimately years later led to his rights being reinstated. But he had to go through all sorts of legal hoops. All sorts of money was spent on lawyer's fees, going to the state, getting a determination from a court, taking that determination down to the state police, proving to the state police. And this was an ongoing thing. The state police then would reissue the concealed carry permit and reinstate his rights. We've since gotten rid of concealed carry permits here. We're constitutional carry now. But then he had to deal with the NICS system. The NICS system still had it in their database. And every time he tried to purchase a gun, they were denying him. So he had to go, again, retain the services of a lawyer, go through this entire process that failed a couple of times just to get his name off the NICS database.
Right.
And this was all based on a false accusation. And this is why I'm so opposed to these things, because it does happen. Now, I don't know what the percentages are in terms of people that falsely claim domestic violence or falsely claim being, scared of somebody, that just want to punish their ex for some reason, or just a neighbor, whomever they want to punish, obviously they have a conflict with. But also in this state, it's interesting to note that restraining orders are oftentimes misused. Through our gun store, we've had customers come in, good customers that have been purchasing guns from us for years. They come in, make a purchase, and then they get denied from the NICS system. Now, it's not just a simple matter of picking the phone up and calling, the FBI saying, hey, I got denied. Can you tell me why? You got to go through an entire process to find out what's going on. But these customers have come back to us, and this is what happened. They were going through a divorce, and in the state of Indiana, if your spouse files for divorce against you, then a restraining order will automatically be issued unless one or both parties contest it. And so you get divorce filed against you, a restraining order is automatically filed, and it's against the male. And then you find out when you go to the gun store, you didn't have a sheriff knock on your door and hand you paperwork saying you have a restraining order against you. You have no idea this has even taken place. You go to buy a gun and now you're denied. And in this current political environment, getting a denial on a gun purchase can be quite scary, because you don't know if that's going to follow up with a federal agent at your door, right? Because they are getting very militant about these things. And
absolutely. And, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
It is. And again, we have people that are all too willing to give up their rights for a false sense of security. They're willing to take your rights away because they have this false sense of security. These domestic violence orders and things like that, restraining orders, red flag laws, they can't stand because they are a gross violation of our constitutional rights. And if you look at it in that light, anybody that favors freedom, whether you believe in the Second Amendment or not, you have to be objective and look at this and say, would you want your rights taken from you, not Second Amendment, but just your freedom? Would you want to be locked up based on an accusation with no evidence?
Right.
because that's what you're advocating for here. And so you would think that people that truly appreciate freedom would take a look at this more objectively, but unfortunately the battle lines are drawn, and either you're pro-gun or anti-gun. And if you're anti-gun, you'll do anything to push your agenda forward. You don't care how many rights you have to trample, how many people's lives you have to destroy. You're committed to taking guns away from every single living, breathing American on the planet, because that's what your political goal is.
Well, because guns are the problem. Guns are vile. Why would you need a semi-automatic anything? I mean, look at the president. Let's ban
full semi-automatic, dude. I mean, seriously, we got to do something about it.
The full semis. I mean, like, you know, it's when I was growing up, you know, like, and this is hearkening back to my heyday, right? When I was younger, the thought never occurred to me as I was coming up that these things would be questions going forward. Again, Tim brings a really good point to this. Take the firearm out of it. Put a different amendment right in there. Plug in the First Amendment. Plug in the very freedom of you walking out on the streets, all based on an accusation. And one of the things that, to kind of wrap this video, the point of the Second Legacy is to frame these things from a different perspective, to give you a little more context, to ask people who necessarily believe this, what about this? And one of the ultimate, most powerful conversations is, what if you take the Second Amendment out and you put the First Amendment in? Would you be okay with this? No, that's our rights. They're equal. One might be scarier than another, depending who you're talking to. But the fact is, they're all equal. All of our rights are there for a purpose. It's in the Bill of Rights. We have to respect all of them, even if you are anti-gun and pro common sense, air quotes, gun safety. You still have to respect the rights, which is why they hate the Bruin decision so much, because it is going Miley Cyrus on all these gun control legislations.
Was that a Wrecking Ball reference?
That was indeed a Wrecking Ball reference. You're welcome.
Why did I know that? I can't believe I just said that on video.
Yeah, who's worse, my reference or you recognize
my
it?
recognition of it? Wow. All right. With that being said, we want to thank you, guys and gals, for tuning in, watching The Second Legacy. Hopefully you find the information that we present here to be useful. And the reason we do want to present the information to you in this format is because we hope to engage with you, get you politically active, get you out there talking to family members, friends, coworkers, talking about these issues, because it's through debate that we are going to continue to win our freedoms, to maintain our freedoms. Because if we just sit back and do nothing, that's all it's required to lose all of our freedoms, including our Second Amendment rights. So with that being said, folks, thanks again for watching. You will see a little thanks button underneath the video player you're watching right now. Mash that thanks button and you can help support us here at The Second Legacy. And also like, share, and subscribe. And please get in the political fight, because this is the way.